Hello everyone. I've been bending some rigid PVC conduit for my recent project. I plan to post a video of that when it's complete, but I thought I'd show you some of the tools and techniques I'm using along the way. The best way I know to heat PVC conduit is with a hotbox. If you price a hotbox now, you'll get sticker shock, but I got mine years ago off eBay and it was slightly damaged. I was able to straighten out the dented cover and it's been serving me fine ever since. So I'll show you how to use a hotbox and discuss some alternative heating techniques. Let's get started. So for running conduit for a DIYer, PVC is probably the easiest conduit to work with. It's basically plastic. This is a 1-inch diameter conduit, Schedule 40 rigid PVC non-metallic conduit. Conforms to UL standard 651, above ground and underground, sunlight resistant. Maximum 90° C wire. But without buying pre-bent sections of conduit, how do you bend conduit to go around a corner, like a 90° bend or a 45 or an offset? So that's where this hotbox comes in. When you heat the conduit up, when it reaches around 200° Fahrenheit, it becomes soft and rubbery. You can bend it any way you want to. You just have to make sure you don't kink it. And that's what the hotbox is for. This hotbox is 1450 watts. There's a heating element inside. I'm going to open it up and show you. There's a latch on top. That's hot. There's a latch on top. You only open the latch when you're working with it. When you're not working with it, you keep it latched. I'm going to get some gloves. So this cover flips open forward. I'm just going to put a piece of wood here because I don't want the cover to hit my rubber mat on the bench. It's very hot. It could melt the mat, I guess. And then there's rollers on each end. And there's a heater right there, the heater element. And that thing, it doesn't look like it's glowing. I guess it doesn't quite glow, but almost. And you get in there close enough, you can't leave your hand in there. Always keep it closed when you're not using it. And the way this works is you lay the conduit on the rollers and just roll it around in front of the heaters. Now, I'm not going to bend this piece, so I'm not going to make it hot enough. But you would close it and just roll it slowly around and it'll heat up. And when it reaches 200°, it'll become very flexible. It'll become actually rubbery. And you'll see that in the next clips I have. So now I'm going to turn this off. Let this thing cool off, and I'll show you the information on the back. So here's the back of the hotbox. It's actually called a Hotbox PVC bender for 1/2-inch through 2-inch diameter, 1450 watts, 120 volts, 12 amps. It's made by Gardner-Bender Electrical, GB Electrical, model number BHB 520D. There's some operating instructions on the back. Number 1 tells you how to remove the bend guide. The bend guide is a bending jig that attaches to the bottom for storage. I'll show you that. Then there's general instructions. Number 2, plug line cord in grounded outlet only and turn on switch. Allow time to heat, then place conduit on supporting rollers. Rotate slowly until conduit is softened. Number 3 here, correct bending temperature can be determined by lifting one end of the conduit. When it deflects readily and has a glossy appearance, it is ready to bend. And number 4, to quickly cool and set bend, sponge conduit with cold water. It is not necessary to fill or plug conduits smaller than 2 inches. So that's interesting. I've always just let it cool off without sponging it, but it would help to make it cool off quicker. And here's a bending guide. And I'll go through some of that information as well.
The chart includes various pipe diameters. I'm using 1 inch for my current project. The minimum inside bend radius for a 1 inch PVC conduit is 6 inches. But I don't want my bends to be that tight. I like to use as large a radius as appears reasonable for a given situation. That makes it easier to bend the pipe and pull the wires. For a 6 inch bend radius, the curved section of the pipe will be 10.5 inches long. For this bend, a minimum straight section of 2 3/4 inches on each end is recommended. I always give myself more fudge factor than that. The minimum total stock length would be 16 inches, except they obviously aren't considering that the Hotbox is 26 inches from roller to roller, and you need a couple inches to stick out on each end, so the absolute minimum stock length you can heat is around 30 inches long.
So here's the bending guide that comes with the Hotbox. It's actually attached to the bottom of the box for storage. It's kind of clumsy to use, awkward and clumsy, and not very accurate, I have to say. You set it up so that the pipe lays in the guide here. This is an adjustable width. And the same thing on this one. And then you set the angle here. You set the angle up for your bend. And heat it up, heat up the conduit, lay it in there, and it holds the shape, or it guides you to hold the correct shape. And I'll show you some real world examples of that. I'm not going to get too deep into it here. I'm preheating it right now. And this is used to bend PVC conduit, so I'm going to bend the 90 degree in this piece of 1 inch conduit, PVC obviously. Once this gets warmed up, I'll go ahead and do it. Get all this dirt off of it. I'm just going to leave this sticking out here a couple inches and out this end at about 6 inches. I cut it a little long intentionally. So you just put it in the box. The box is all heated up. Rotate this around and around. When it gets hot enough, it'll become very soft and bendable. It gets kind of rubbery. And there it is. See that? I put it in this bending jig to get the approximate shape. And this does kind of collapse in here, so I'm just trying to hold it so it doesn't collapse. As soon as it cools up enough, it'll become rigid again, and collapsing the pipe here won't be a problem. As soon as it takes a set, I'll turn this off, let it cool off. Feels like a furnace over here. and that's it. Pretty rigid. Cooled off enough to not lose its shape. Okay, I've got this thing set up to give me 1.5 inch offset in the pipe. Okay, I've been letting this heat up for a while. I think it's ready to go. I'm just rotating the pipe around inside the hot box. There's 4 rollers, 2 on each end. It just lays in there and rolls around on them. After a minute or two, kind of just test it, see if it'll bend. When it gets very hot, it'll start to roll around, flop around in there. Okay, it's almost there. There it is. Extremely floppy. And there's my offset. You can buy pre-bent elbows, but if you do a lot of PVC work, that can get costly. With a hot box, you can also make custom bends that aren't available at the home centers. You just have to hold it in position until it cools off enough to set. Once it takes a set, it won't bend anymore. It's almost there. I can cool this off now, turn it off. And there it is. It's got 1.5 inch offset in it. A little bit of a kink right there. Not bad. It's not going to bother anything. So I'm getting ready to make a 90-degree bend in a full 10-foot length of PVC conduit. Now the conduit is bent by heating it in a hot box. It actually becomes rubbery when it reaches 200 degrees Fahrenheit. But the problem with this big length is I really don't want to use that little bending jig I have. It's just a guide that comes with the hot box. But I also want this bend to be a long sweep. I don't want a tight bend. So I set up this makeshift bending jig as a guide. It's just with some dimensional lumber. I have a 4x4 along here on the floor and a 2x4 there. And the 2x4 is clamped on the front and back legs of the bench. So that's held that way. And this 4x4 is tucked up against the legs on the front. So that's a very reasonable right angle. And for bending conduit, that's plenty accurate. There is some flex in conduit after you're done. So I'm going to be putting a bend in this conduit this way to my left, and I want it to end up 3 feet out here. So once this conduit is heated up to the point where it becomes flexible, how am I going to know when I bend it to the left here where it's at 90 degrees? And also I need to make sure that it's 3 feet length on the L there, 3 feet from the corner. So I put a stop block up there 3 feet out from the corner, so when this is flexible I can just butt it up against that stop block, swing it around this way, hold it up against this side, and just hold it in place. And once it cools off, it'll take a set and it won't lose its shape. So I'm going to demonstrate that now. I'm going to have to reposition the camera to capture this. So I'm going to go ahead and reposition the camera, heat the pipe up, and record the bending process. You won't see me heat the pipe.
If I had 3 hands, I'd hit it with a cold, wet sponge.
Okay, that looks pretty good. I just have to hold it in place now until it sets up. It's going to cool. After it cools, it'll be all set. It's still flexible. So I had to give it a lot of heat because that box is like 24 inches wide, but it wasn't heating a 24-inch wide section. So I had to leave it in there extra long to try to get more of it heated so I could have a longer sweep in this bend. So that's why it's taking a little long to cool off. It's got a lot of heat in it. Still almost too hot to touch. It definitely hasn't set up yet. I'll use this bucket of sand to hold it. Yeah, that feels like it's set up now. So the Hotbox didn't heat up a long enough section of the pipe so I could get the amount of swing I wanted and the amount of take up here. So I ended up here being about 4.5 inches short. It's not up to my 36-inch stop block. So when I measure what I have here from the top of this pipe, or from the end of this L to the right angle here, still a perfect right angle. So when I measure from the end of this pipe to the right angle here, it gives me 32 inches. It's fine. I actually just remeasured down there, and I actually just need 30 inches, so I'll still be cutting off some extra. When I set the stop block for 36 inches, I allowed myself an extra 6 inches from my original measurement, just for eventualities like this where things don't exactly work out perfectly. But now I have a nice 90-degree bend in my full-length 10-foot piece of 1-inch rigid conduit. And that's almost ready to be installed. I have to do the deburring on this end first.
Most DIYers will want a less expensive tool to heat their conduit. One alternative is heating blankets. They're available in different sizes and costs, but they're all still pretty expensive. This blanket costs a bit less. However, many DIYers use a heat gun to bend their PVC conduit because they're cheaper and readily available. But do they know it's a questionable practice? Let's look at the National Electrical Code. NEC Article 352 covers rigid PVC conduit. 352.24 covers bends. A. How made. Bends shall be so made that the conduit will not be damaged and the internal diameter of the conduit will not be effectively reduced. So whatever bending method we're using, we have to make sure we don't damage the conduit or reduce its inside diameter. In the previous bending demonstrations, I was careful not to allow the pipe to be kinked or collapsed during the bending process. The goal is to make a smooth flowing bend that doesn't reduce the pipe diameter at any point. The radius of the curve to the center line of such bends shall not be less than shown in Table 2, Chapter 9. I'm using 1-inch PVC conduit. Table 2 in Chapter 9 indicates it shouldn't be bent with an inside radius of less than 5 3/4 inches. Note that the GB bending chart rounded that up to 6 inches. Now here's the tricky part. Field bends shall be made only with identified bending equipment. So what's identified bending equipment? The definition of identified equipment can be found in Article 100. Identified, as applied to equipment, recognizable as suitable for the specific purpose, function, use, environment, application, and so forth, where described in a particular code requirement. So how do we interpret this? I think this is clearly identifiable as being recognizable and suitable for the specific purpose. It's fair to say this is as well. But I don't think this fits the definition of suitable equipment for the specific purpose. Although many people use a heat gun, it's probably not in compliance with the NEC. What are your thoughts on this? Does using a heat gun to bend conduit violate the NEC?
So I have one more bend to make here. I'm going to try to make a 45 roughly, or less than 45. And I'm going to use the heat gun method. This is 1-inch conduit. So let's see what kind of luck I have with this. Heat gun and eyeball.
This old heat gun is rated for 1400 watts and up to 1100 degrees.
The plastic's starting to smell hot.
We'll notice the end of the pipe beginning to droop. We're almost there. I was too impatient. We're beginning to see why the Hotbox method is superior. It's so much faster and heats more evenly. The pipe's too hot to handle.
I don't want it to start collapsing. That's the problem. Got to keep its round shape. So I think I'm going to let it cool off up here a bit where it's already bent a little, and heat it down here and bend that a little more. I actually need it to bend closer in here. It's hitting down here now, resting on this. So I think I'll let it go ahead and cool off right there. That's a pretty good bend. It's not quite 45, but I want it to be less than 45. So I'm going to let it cool off and go do a trial fit in the location where it's going to be used. And if I need to make adjustments, I'll come out and heat it some more and adjust it. But it's a nice smooth bend. The walls have not collapsed anywhere. So the inside diameter has been maintained on the conduit, and that's the important thing. It's already firmed up. Okay, I'll go try it out. This bend worked out perfectly. It looks like it's going to work out perfectly once I get everything all cemented together. You just deburr the inside of this a little bit. The idea is to remove the sharp edges, not to create any new ones. That seems good. Okay, so now I'm going to cement this on here. I've got to line it up, eyeball it up as perfectly as I can. Right on the handle for my workmate. Okay. Got to hold it in position while it sets up. Oops, should have left it alone. Okay, that looks good.
As long as we're here, I'll address 352.24b, the number of bends in a run. B, number in one run. The total degrees of bends in a conduit run shall not exceed 360 degrees between pull points. So my feeder conduit that's attached to the bottom of this sub panel, at the top, it's almost perfectly plumb. It's off by 0.3 degrees. But then down at the offset, right there, it's 9.9, 10 degrees. So I'm going to call that a 10-degree bend, which means that the bend below it is 10 degrees. So that's a combined 20 degrees of bend. That offset pipe that originates in the bottom of the sub panel comes down through the floor into this 90 and terminates at this L body. So there's two 10-degree bends up above and 90 degrees here, so that's a total of 110 degrees, which is well within the limit of 360 degrees. That's all that code means. It's as simple as that. You can't have more than 360 degrees worth of bends. Then from the L body here, we go through this 90-degree sweep. That's a 90-degree bend. And it terminates over here at another L body. So that pipe just has a 90-degree bend in it, which is well below the 360-degree maximum bends you're allowed in a run. So a run starts at a box or an L body or some other conduit body and ends at a box or another conduit body. And between those, you're allowed up to 360 degrees in bends. Okay, this is a Klein PVC pipe cutter. I already marked the pipe there, you can see. You just kind of ratchet this blade through. It's just that easy. This will cut 1/2 inch to 1 1/4 inch PVC conduit.
So you want to deburr the ID on these cuts, whether you make a cut or the original factory cut, because it's a little bit sharp, the edge there, and you don't want that to nick your insulation as it's pulling through. So you can deburr it. There are reamers you can get to easily, quickly deburr it. I never bothered getting one of those. I never found one at a yard sale. I would have gotten it if it was cheap. But I don't do enough of this work to really need it. So I just use a regular utility knife and just go around the inside like that. Awkwardly working left-handed here for the camera. But as you go around like this, you can see the little shavings of PVC curl off. You can also just scrape it with the blade like that, right on the edge. And that cleans it up nicely. It's not sharp. Nothing's going to catch on it. And it won't nick up your wires as they're pulled through. Again, I hardly ever do this kind of work anymore, so I really don't need the big reamer that you could use to clean this out. There's a reamer that does the ID and the OD. I don't need those. This is fine right here. So if you're working with PVC conduit, there's a good chance you'll be working with conduit bodies. I happen to have 3 examples here, so I thought I'd show you how to tell them apart. First of all, you can see that this is an L, right? There. And this is an L. And this is an L. Pipe goes in one side and comes out the other, and it's in the shape of an L. But how do you tell them apart? Well, on the back on these it's molded that this is an LR, 1 inch. This is an LL, 1 inch, and this one is, well, you can't read it, it's so small. So if you look at these straight at the cover, you can see on this one the pipe comes in down here and it comes out over here, and that forms the L. And which way does the L go? It goes to the right, so that's an LR, and it says LR on the back. On this one, again, we're looking straight at the cover here. The pipe enters the top of the L and exits the bottom of the L going left. See, it's a left L. So that's a LL, which is a left L. And it does say 1 inch LL on it. And finally, the last example I have is this one, where the pipe comes down through here and out through here, but you're not looking at the cover. So here, when you're looking at the cover, the pipe comes out the back. So it comes down here and it exits out the back on the bottom of the L. So this is an LB, B for back. Again, this is an LR because the L pipe comes out the right. And this is an LL because the L pipe comes out the left. It's easy to tell when you look at the cover. So this one, when you look at the cover, you don't see it coming out the left or the right. It's coming out the back. Okay, that's a good chamfer, and there's no sharp edges. So to cement these pipes together, you want to start with clean pipe ends. Make sure there's no dirt or debris in there. And I'm using the OD medium gray PVC cement. It says right on it, electrical. Following the instructions, they tell you to put a heavy coat on the pipe. And then a light coat inside the fitting, inside the socket. And then the instructions actually say, put another coat on the pipe. Then push the pipe all the way in to the socket and give it a quarter turn twist. And hold it in place for 30 seconds. I'm just going to wipe off the excess. So that's all there is to gluing these pipes up. I'm just going to continue holding it for the rest of the 30 seconds and it'll be all set.
Thank you for watching. Please take a moment to like and subscribe.